Adrenaline surged through the veins of the Scottish group, still dazed from the frantic chase they had just escaped. The gas station seemed like a refuge, but it was merely a facade. The dim lights, though present, failed to dispel the terror that surrounded the three of them. They had evaded something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The sound of an unknown car roaring behind them made their hearts race. The road ahead seemed endless, but suddenly, everything shattered in an instant. The impact was brutal, a collision that left them frozen, the sound of destruction echoing in their minds. Yet the horror of the crash was nothing compared to what was still to come. The tires burst and the car spun out of control. The scent of burning rubber and gasoline mixed with the fear thick in the air. The group was stunned, unable to think. Amidst the chaos, only one thought lingered, the terror of discovering who or what was behind this attack. They had been hunted, but what awaited them now? Was there any way to escape, or were they destined to become just another victim of the nightmare closing in on them? Fear was palpable, a shadow that clung to them even as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. When they finally managed to stumble out of the wrecked car, their faces pale and trembling, they realized they had been struck by something far more sinister than a simple chase. The unknown car had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a suffocating sense of helplessness. The pursuit, it seemed, was just the beginning of a nightmare now unfolding before them. The question that lingered in the air was, who was behind this? And more importantly, what did they want? The terrifying thought that this was merely the start sent chills down their spines. And their escape, would it truly save them? The eyes of the police were fixed on the accident, but what seemed at first to be a simple hit and run or an inexplicable collision soon unraveled into something far more sinister. The first clues emerged from the wreckage. The force of the crash had scattered shards of glass and twisted metal everywhere, but it was something more subtle that caught the investigators' attention. The smell. A mixture of gasoline and something else. Something rotten. Inside the wrecked car they found documents, dirty, torn but still legible. Those scraps of paper filled with names and numbers were the link between the crash and a much larger, unsolved crime. And fear settled in, for the connection was too clear to ignore. The crash site quickly turned into an investigation of unexpected proportions. The car, seemingly without a clear owner, was tied to something much darker than a simple chase. Details surfaced gradually, like puzzle pieces falling into place. The vehicle was linked to an unsolved case, one the police had already been investigating, though it had seemingly been abandoned, a story left without an ending. What was really going on? Had the Scottish group just become the latest victims of something much bigger, or were they being pulled into a web of horror beyond their imagination? The connection between the car and the unresolved crime led investigators to question who else was involved. What more was hidden behind that car, those scattered clues now filling the investigation reports? And, more importantly, who else was watching, waiting for the evidence to lead to something even more terrifying? With each discovery, the fear deepened, as every clue seemed to be another open door into the horror yet to come. What had initially seemed like an isolated accident was now a tangled web of evidence tied to an endless nightmare. The silence that followed the discovery of the evidence was unbearable. The Scottish group, still in shock, couldn't process what had just happened. The violence of the situation had struck them in a way that words could never describe. They had set out on a simple trip but had found themselves in the middle of a horror story that even the most twisted imagination couldn't have conceived. Fear was no longer just an abstract feeling, it was something real, something tangible. Something that would stay with them forever. They had escaped immediate danger, but the brutality of the situation still echoed in their minds, a memory that refused to fade. What had once seemed like just a car crash had revealed itself to be a nightmare in the flesh. Reality had proven to be crueler than any horror tale they had ever heard. They saw the marks of violence in every inch of the road, in every twisted piece of metal left behind. The blood, the wreckage, everything pointed to the fact that they weren't dealing with something simple, but rather an unfathomable crime, one that had left a trail of destruction. The horror of realizing they were now at the heart of a violent war, one fought in the shadows, consumed them. And the worst part was knowing that, somehow, they were now entangled in it. They could no longer ignore the violence surrounding them. Every step they took felt like a deeper descent into terror, as the memories of that moment refused to fade. They had been caught in the eye of the storm, and the fear of becoming a target once again paralyzed them. The violence of the incident was not just physical, it had affected them mentally, emotionally. It was as if, after the impact, they were no longer the same people. Whatever had happened that night could not be forgotten, could not be ignored. The terror would continue to haunt them until the truth was fully uncovered. And no matter how much they wanted to run, something told them the worst was still to come. After the brutality of the encounter and the discovery of the evidence, the Scottish group felt that somehow the only option left was to flee. Not just from the immediate danger, but from something much bigger, something about to consume everything in its path. They ran, but each step felt heavy, as if fear itself had latched onto them, slowing them down. Escape seemed like the only possible salvation, but at the same time, a sense of helplessness lingered. What else could they do? How could they outrun something so vast, so terrifying? The terror never left them for a second, because they knew that as they ran, the horror was right behind them, waiting to devour them. But what they didn't know was that, even if they managed to escape physically, the experience had changed them forever. The memories, the images of violence and destruction, kept hammering in their minds. Fleeing from immediate danger didn't mean escaping the nightmare. On the contrary, the more they tried to forget, the deeper the scars became. The horror they had lived through was not something that could simply be erased. The fear of being tracked, of being found, of being dragged back into the abyss of violence, was always there, lurking. And with that, a sinister question haunted them. What if their escape was just the beginning of something much darker? Something they could never truly escape from? As the group tried to regain control of their lives, a sense of powerlessness overtook them. They were physically safe, but their souls were scarred in ways that could never be erased. The horror they had experienced was not something tangible, something that could be destroyed or left behind. It was an emotional scar, a permanent reminder. Even as they tried to move forward, the echoes of the past continued to torment their minds. And as the shadows stretched long into the distance, one question remained: could this escape truly save any of them? Or would the events of that night continue to haunt them forever?